reportedly from the Houston Chronicle, Oklahoma and Texas are interested in joining the SEC. And Rob Fischer is here with us now from SEC Media Days. Rob, this ends up being a storyline yesterday.
You're just shaking your head.
What was the take of everything there? I heard Greg Sankey had no comment, but did not necessarily deny this report either.
Guys, all hell broke loose.
I'll tell you what, you ran out of snacks?
No, that's fine. It's great knowing that I didn't have to do a radio show yesterday, because walking down Radio Row yesterday afternoon was sheer panic.
Stressful.
Everyone freaking out, running around, trying to find sources and trying to get the story and the scoop and what's going on, because this isn't a little story. This is huge, and for it to drop on the second to last day of media days. I mean, good luck to three newbies today: Eli Drinkowitz, Sam Pittman, and Brian Harsin, who all are going to have to answer questions about Oklahoma and Texas coming to the SEC. Everybody I talked to last night, I mean, it sounds like it came together quickly after the news broke yesterday from the Houston Chronicle, but Ross Bjork saying we want to be the only SEC team from the state of Texas, the AD for Texas A&M. It would take 11 of 14 votes for this to go through. Even if A&M were to vote against, they'd need more people to vote for them or to vote on their side. Pat Forty suggesting that Texas, regardless of what happens, may even go independent. Oklahoma's pretty much just latching on to Texas any way that they possibly can. But according to some, this is something that's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. That there are both Oklahoma and Texas are going to let the Big 12 know that they're not interested in extending the television rights for the conference, and that they will let the SEC know that they're interested in joining the SEC. And I think at this point, if you're the SEC, come on in. Let's be the first super conference, because that's the way that college football is going to go. And if you have the opportunity to get Texas and Oklahoma as the two teams, you are the super conference. And so, yeah, this is huge news. I mean, Jimbo Fisher even said it yesterday when he was asked, said it looks like those two teams might be interested and they want to get into the SEC. And he just laughed. He said, yeah, I bet they would. So I think that they would love to be in the SEC, and if the SEC looks at the future and says that a super conference is what's going to happen next, and be the first to get to 16, why not take those two programs?
Rob, I have to correct you. It would not be the first super conference, because the first super conference was the Western Athletic Conference 25 years ago when they got to 16 schools. But obviously it's just a little different. I'm just, I got to shout out the WAC whenever I possibly can.
There's a bit of a difference in Idaho and Texas.
It wasn't Idaho at the time. Sorry. It was Utah, BYU, Fresno State.
Okay, Fresno State, BYU,
Colorado
and
State,
Utah,
Air Force
Texas,
Academy,
Oklahoma. Big difference.
Hawaii, Louisiana Tech, SMU, UTEP.
Jessica, you need to stop going, man. Stop going.
16 schools, and then it all broke apart. No, I was joking with these guys before the show started. Like, when I was a kid, conference realignment were the two scariest words in the world, because I had watched the 16-team WAC fall apart, and then it was always a scramble to make sure that it didn't happen again, because as we know, if this continues to move forward, the last time conference realignment was a question, Memphis was trying to get into the Big 12 itself. And what happens to the Big 12 if and when Oklahoma and Texas leave? It's a domino effect for those smaller schools. While, yes, you do have the super conference effect if the SEC is the conference that ultimately gets to 16 teams first.
Yeah, and I think this is bad news for Memphis, because where does it, if you go to the 16-team super conference, who's the Big 12 is going to have scraps left. So the ACC, the Big 10, the Pac-12 will all try to snatch up those teams from the Big 12. And does Memphis fall into one of those conferences? I don't know. I don't know if there's room for them anywhere. And once you have these super conferences, that's when we're going to have the super conferences are going to pretty much go away from the others. And, it was great hearing Jimbo Fisher yesterday talking about how he's all in favor of an expanded playoff. And he said his reason for the expanded playoff is for the 60 teams in America that have no shot of winning the national title. He said it's a joke that it's the only sport in all of college athletics that half of the country has no chance of winning a national title. And he's right. So a 12-team playoff could change that. But now all of a sudden, if you're changing to 16-team super conferences and you have 4 16-team super conferences, that gets you to 64. A playoff can be set up very easily between 64 teams. And, what happens to the others? Well, they're probably left out and left fighting for their own division. They're left fighting for their own championship. And where's the TV money, and how much TV money is going to be left for them? I don't know. I think it's kind of a scary day for Memphis, and it's one of those moments again, as we've seen so many times over the last couple of decades, that Memphis needs to try and position themselves somewhere, and need to start working on it now. If they haven't already started working on that, they need to find a landing spot, because if not, they could be left out.
Yeah, what happens to the American Conference and some of the smaller conferences in all this? The 64-team football playoff, that's not realistic, because then what happens to your regular season? I mean, I understand the allure of the basketball tournament and the other large championships, but there's no other sport that will drain you as much as football, and you can't play more than one game a week. And if you're going to go to a 64-team tournament, that's not realistic, because then now what do you do to your regular season? And if you're going to have these super conferences, you're not going to have a lot of games in conference anyway. It does away with a non-conference schedule, and then to have 64 teams, I can see 12. I could even see 16, but I don't know that you can go really larger than that and still have a regular season.
I think.
Well, I think what I'm sorry, CJ. I think what really shapes up when. And Mike Leach is one that he wants a 64-team playoff. That's silly. And I'm with
that's
you,
Mike
Pete.
Leach.
Mike Leach just likes chaos. Yeah. So
right. That's just not going to happen. I mean, that, as you said, how long would that take, and how many more games are you playing? And my point is, I think if you have 4 super conferences of 16 teams each, you have 64 total teams. It sets up a number for a playoff where you could have you don't need a 12-team playoff. You could have an 8-team playoff where you have your 4 conference winners, and then you have 4 wild cards between the 4 conferences. I think that number 64 just sets up to where you could have a playoff of those 64 teams, but probably maybe an 8-team playoff, maybe 12 if you want to go a little bit bigger, since now you're only dealing with super conferences and you wouldn't have to deal with the other FBS conferences. You wouldn't have to deal with them getting into any sort of playoff. So I think it just works out numbers-wise where you could have something that would be fair among those super conferences, and you could look at a playoff like that. And I would think maybe 8 teams would probably be that number.
We talked about the inequities in college football yesterday, and we talked about it from the standpoint of some of the bigger conferences versus smaller conferences. But think about interconferences, right? The Big Ten is paying $55 million a school. The SEC is paying $45 million, and with their new deal, when this current TV contract is up, they'll be paying around $55 million a school. The Big 12 is left paying $30 million. The Pac-12 is somewhere around $30 million. The ACC will be around $30 to $40 million, right? So it makes sense for Texas and Oklahoma. We know what Texas is. They're money hungry anyway. Like, it makes sense to go where the money is. And then how's that going to be fair for those schools? We got down this road way back when Missouri and A&M started leaving, right? When Colorado left the Big 12, it put us down this road to this massive super conference type thing. And unfortunately for programs like Memphis and Central Florida and those types of programs, right? Boise State, another one. Like, they're going to be left behind. Not only are they going to be left behind, some of these schools that are currently in Power 5 conferences will be left behind too. When Oklahoma and Texas leave, if the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and I guess the ACC don't come in and start trying to snatch up some of these West Virginias and Kansas States of the world, they're going to be left out, and then they'll be looking for conference homes too. And I'm here for it. I love it. I can't get enough of conference realignment, baby.
Well, that's why you have Oklahoma State releasing a statement yesterday when this news breaks, because originally when the news popped off like almost a decade ago now that Oklahoma and Texas might join the Pac-12, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State were so tightly wound politically together that it wasn't possible to separate them. Oklahoma State pops in yesterday and is like, we have heard unconfirmed reports that OU and UT approached Southeastern Conference officials about joining the SEC. We are gathering information and will monitor closely. If true, we would be gravely disappointed. While we place a premium on history, loyalty, and trust, be assured we will aggressively defend and advance what is best for Oklahoma State and our strong athletic program, which continues to excel in the Big 12 and nationally. They're like, please don't leave us. Please don't leave us.
Oklahoma State kept Oklahoma out of the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Big Ten wants Oklahoma to come in, but they've got that standard academically thing. I don't know what it's called. And Oklahoma State doesn't fit that standard. And so until Oklahoma gets there, Big Ten can't add Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma's like, oh, like little brothers keeping us back, man. Oklahoma's breaking away from Oklahoma State in a way that Texas A&M broke away from Texas in 2012.
There's one important question that has not been asked that needs to be asked in all this. Matthew McConaughey,
What does Matthew think?
the Minister of Culture for UT. I want to know what Matthew McConaughey is thinking about all this, because he might be a major decision maker in this. But it was interesting, Fish. Chuck Cooperstein with the Dallas Mavericks, and on Twitter today he said OU and Texas are always going to be joined at the hip. Whatever one does, the other one is going to follow. And it's interesting that Texas is the only school that has its own television network, the Longhorn Network. Now, most of their programming is Olympic sports, whether it's soccer or volleyball or whatever. They do get one or two television football games as well. So then what happens there? And I think this could also change the landscape not only of college football, but also how college football is being telecasted throughout the country.
Well, with these contracts coming up, and I think, Pete, we deal with it with the Grizzlies, with the number of cable subscribers who are dropping cable. Is a big deal. And I think with this next contract coming up, it's scary to these conferences about that money number possibly going down. And nobody wants the numbers to go down. They want them to go up. So how do you make it go up? Well, you have a big splash with Oklahoma and Texas joining your conference. You add all those television numbers, you add those two teams, and now all of a sudden you feel like you got a great product that you can sell. That you're going to make a lot of money on this next television contract. The biggest problem is, and the worst thing about sports, is when politics get involved. And when it comes to Texas and Oklahoma, politics will become involved. Oklahoma State puts that statement out yesterday. Well, Oklahoma State's kind of they're the little brother of Oklahoma, and they are tagged at the hip as well, where whatever happens to Oklahoma State's supposed to follow. And you're going to get politicians who are going to be involved. You're going to get presidents and chancellors who are going to be involved. That Oklahoma's going to have to take care of Oklahoma State. That Texas is going to have to take care of Texas Tech. So what happens to those two teams? You really, it's not going to be just as simple as Oklahoma saying goodbye. We're going off to the SEC. There's going to be a lot of feedback and a lot of heat taken by that university for not taking care of Oklahoma State that might become political. So this is a long, the number that comes out is 2 weeks away from this possibly becoming reality. I'd be surprised if anything happens that quick. Maybe an announcement like that would come out in the next couple of weeks, but for it to actually come to fruition, it's going to take a lot longer because there are going to be a lot of people involved in these decisions.
Yeah, and I agree with your point that in the very competitive bidding for television rights, and with more and more cord cutters, the ESPNs of the world, the ABCs, the CBSs, they're all going to want a better product in order to, or the conferences are going to want a better product in order to drive up those rights fees. So the idea of a super conference is the way for them to go, given that some of the cable viewership numbers, or at least the cable subscriber numbers, are going down. So I mean, it makes sense for the SEC to be the biggest best conference it possibly can be, and you add Oklahoma and Texas to that mix, that becomes very, very attractive to the CBSs and ABCs and ESPNs of the world.
Yeah, and people are quick to pop off, well, we could get 2 better teams than Texas at this. I saw so many Tennessee fans yesterday saying if Texas comes to the SEC, they will have to go by UT Junior. Okay, Tennessee, you have a ton of room to talk right now. I don't care what Texas does. We are constantly talking about Texas. Is Texas back? Texas back? Texas back? They're one of the biggest brands in all of college football, college sports.
Speaking of brands, Jessica, I just went through and counted it up. The top 20 athletic departments, people who are bringing in money athletically, not necessarily spending it, but just bringing in money. Of the top 20, you've got 10 in the SEC alone. The others, there's 7 in the Big 10, 2 in the ACC, 2 in the Big 12. The thing with the Big 12, though, is you have Oklahoma who comes in at that number 8 spot, and guess where Texas comes in? Number 1.
Yep.
Right? Like that's the whole thing. And if you're Texas, and Texas has apparently convinced Oklahoma of this also, you're looking around at the rest of the Big 12, at the Kansases and the Kansas States and the Texas Techs, like, what are you giving me? You're not giving me anything. In the SEC, sure, Georgia's there making money. Alabama's there in the top 10. LSU is there in the top 10. But guess what? Tennessee is floating around still, as miserable as their football program is. They are still top 20 in revenue. Kentucky may as well not have a football program, but because basketball is what basketball is at Kentucky, they're still in the top 20 in revenue. Right? Texas and Oklahoma need help. They should have expanded, because I think Memphis could have given them that help. They chose not to because they got greedy. And now look at them. They're trying to leave and break up that conference now.
But that's where it comes back to the Memphis. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and I think what you're saying, CJ, is it kind of goes back to the point that I was talking about a little bit earlier. Texas seems to have all the control. You know, I don't think Texas is in a desperate situation. I think Texas is looking at what's best for them. And you're right. You know, what are you other teams, your other programs, what are they giving me? Nothing. They're not making my brand any better. We've made our brand on our own. So I think Texas is the type of school they could go to the SEC and still have a little leverage. They have their own network. They could go independent if they want and still be that number 1 brand in all of college sports. So I think Texas still has a little leverage. The team that you got to be concerned about is Oklahoma, because Oklahoma wants to just kind of ride on Texas' coattails. And if Texas were to go independent, well, where's that leave Oklahoma? Still in the Big 12? They'll be begging the SEC to take them. But then who's that 16th team? Do you take Oklahoma and Oklahoma State? Do you want both of those? Do you really want Oklahoma State? Does that do anything for the conference, especially if you're taking Oklahoma? So I think Oklahoma's in a tough spot here because Texas still, they still have some leverage. They still have their own network. They still have their brand. They still own the state of Texas. You know, I think Texas, while maybe looking for greener pastures, I think they at least still have some leverage if they wanted to go a different route. Oklahoma, meanwhile, they're just waiting to see where the cards fall and hope that they're involved.
CJ, where's Baylor on that list? Or is Baylor on that list? Because I think that is one wild card when you think about a school that has had men's basketball success, women's basketball success, and football success. They will need a home. So get Oklahoma out of there.
Yeah,
but Baylor.
I'm strolling through. I'm in the top 30.
Then
It's
That's
Kansas.
the thing.
Kansas is in at 28.
Baylor's had so much success, but it doesn't translate into a national brand.
Because it's not about success, right? Texas has not had success. Other Big 12 teams the past decade have been way more successful than Texas. It is the brand that Texas is. And Oklahoma, it didn't used to be Oklahoma and Texas. Right, Oklahoma was attached to Nebraska.
Right.
That was their big
those
rival.
those
and
days,
Nebraska
the Big 8 days.
Nebraska looked at Oklahoma and said, "Okay, me or Texas." Oklahoma chose Texas, and Nebraska's like, "Fine, we're out. We can't reason with these people. We're done." It would be nice for to get that Oklahoma-Nebraska rivalry back. It would be nice to get Oklahoma into the Big Ten as long as they don't have to play Michigan in football. I would love to see it, but I don't think that's going to happen because nobody wants to take on Texas. Right? Texas comes with different types of baggage for all the reasons you guys named, the Longhorn Network and other things. Plus, they are just arrogant to the point to where they ruined not one but 2 conferences. Don't forget what they did to the Southwestern Conference, right? They got rid of that one too for greener pastures when they joined the Big 8. And Arkansas was left to try and figure out what they're supposed to be doing now. Texas is a problem if you're looking for a good conference mate. And the SEC seems to be operating pretty smoothly. I don't know why they want to bring Texas in.
Meanwhile, the four Pac-12 commissioners tweeting yesterday, just when I thought my first month on the job could not get more interesting. Don't fail us, George Kliavkoff.
I like that no one's denied it. I mean,
No.
So it feels like there is smoke here. And some even describing it as it's gone past smoke. It's fire. It's actual fire. So we'll see. But I'm with you, CJ. I don't, the Texas thing, you're taking on a lot when you want Texas. Certainly it's great to bring on the brand, but if you're the SEC, it's kind of like, well, you're going to do it our way. And I don't think Texas is capable of saying, okay, yeah, we'll do it your way. I think Texas is only capable of doing it the way that they want to do it. And I don't know if that's a fit for the SEC. I mean, but if you're the SEC and you want to get to the 16 teams, is there a better option? I mean, if you don't get Texas, let's say you don't get Texas, well, you probably don't get Oklahoma either. So where you go? West Virginia? I mean, does that do anything for you? Oklahoma State? I mean, well, again, Oklahoma State's going to be tied to Oklahoma. So I don't know. I think just brand-wise and SEC naming-wise and rights-wise, if you can get these two and you can get it on your terms, you do everything you can to do it.
Two things real quick. One, to your question about Baylor, Jessica, they're private, so they didn't have to report to the USA Today. Two, Rob, to your point about Texas doing it the SEC's way, Texas has never had a peer, had multiple peers, right? Texas has been, when they were in the Southwest Conference, it was just Texas and the Texas schools in Arkansas. And then when they got to the Big 12, it was Texas and Oklahoma. Like, it's one peer. When you go to the SEC, Alabama's your peer, Florida's your peer, LSU's going to be your peer, Georgia's going to be your peer. And so the group then, Texas is not the big boy in the room, and they can't necessarily bully everybody. So maybe I'm going back and forth on this, people. I'm flip-flopping all over the place. Maybe those schools in the SEC can make Texas act right. Will they? I don't know. I'd love to see it, though.
I will say one more thing on this before we move on to other things at SEC Media Days. The SEC Network, which is the SEC's TV channel, essentially, has already come up with an idea of if they join. They already have 4-team pods. It would be a 9-game conference schedule. Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas would make up Pod D in the SEC. So, like you said, it's not just smoke. There is fire, and there are already pods being created.
They need better names for the pods than
like
Pod D.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to work on these
I mean,
pod
you
names.
can go Texas A&M, Texas, Missouri, Oklahoma, call them the former Big 12 pod. Like that's one pod name.
The little 12 pod.
You can go Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Kentucky.
No. Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Auburn, Alabama. How did Vandy get stuck with Bama in their pod? That's a tough scene right there.
Well, I mean, I was trying to give a pathetic pod, but okay, sure, that's fine. Keep that pod there. It's pretty close to pathetic when you think about the contributions Vanderbilt and Tennessee have made to the SEC recently.
I do love that they kept Texas A&M and Texas in separate pods because they know they need to keep those guys separated as much as they possibly can.
Yeah, they won't work well together.
No,
they won't be nice.
They never have.
All
and
right.
never will.
No.
Rob, there were other storylines at SEC Media Days yesterday. Nick Saban, the man himself, spoke, and if there
Coach
was
Nick
any
Saban.
question, thank you. I almost forgot. Coach Nick Saban talked about his team's vaccination rates. Take a listen to what Coach Nick Saban had to say.